Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very proud to introduce our esteemed speaker today for today's seminar, and it's Professor Charles Hartman. Professor Hartman is a distinguished scholar in the field of middle period Chinese literature and history, and he obtained his PhD in Chinese literature from Indiana University in 1975, and subsequently he published his first book, Han Yu and the Tang Search for Unity, in 1986. Later, Professor Hartman shifted his research focus to the historiography and politics of the Song dynasty. And his extensive knowledge and insights in these areas are masterfully presented in his two recent monographs. As you can see, the making of Song dynasty history and structure of governance in Song dynasty China. These two books were recently published by Cambridge University Press in 2020 and 2023. And today, we are greatly honored to have Professor Hartman to deliver a lecture titled Cash In, Paper Out, The Politics of Paper Currency in Late Song China. And the lecture explores the political and economic background surrounding the rise of the paper currency in the 1160s. It also examines the subsequent attempts to stabilize the currency and the political conflicts that arose within the Song governments due to their reliance on the paper currency. How the introduction of the paper currency created a division between imperial technocrats and civil officials will be highlighted in this lecture. And without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Hartman.
Well, Ming, thank you. Thank you very, very much for the introduction, right? And thank you very much for the invitation to come to Hong Kong and to talk about this topic, right? This topic is an outtake. It is an issue that did not find its way into these two books. But it is, as I hope to show you today, it is related to the major topic of the two books, right? So what? Let's see. One of the major points of the first book, The Making of Song Dynasty History, is to explain the background and the origin of what I call the controlling narrative of Song history. And that controlling narrative looks something like this. So the monarchy fostered the literati, so literati over military values, and this enabled then the monarchy to control these groups: imperial clan, affines, eunuchs, favorites, and this resulted in political stability and cultural fluorescence despite the Song's military weakness, right? Now, that narrative is something you'll find in virtually every middle school textbook of Chinese history, right? Scholars here know that this is not so, right? Okay, but nevertheless, this is still very much what you find, right? And in looking at how this arose, right, one has to look basically at ideas about Song officialdom, right? And how Song officials are sort of characterized, right? And so what we find is that in Song, some of the major terms that our Song officials use to talk about each other are Junzi and Xiaoren, right? Now, today we think that's kind of funny, right? But sometimes this was deadly serious language, right? And so the first chapter in this book, Structures of Governance, talks about Song uses of these two terms and what they mean in political terms in Song, right? The point we want to make in this slide is that modern scholars have pretty much not really differed that much from this basic division, so that James Liu finds that we have these three kinds of officials, but there's a division between the ones he calls scholarly and idealistic, and these ones over here, right? Ewing sure does something much the same way. Okay? So even though modern scholars are a lot more sort of let's say sophisticated, right? That they still more or less accept this division, right? Now, the basic idea in the second book of mine, Structures of Governance, right, is that this division in song between Junzi and Shaolin does reflect something real, right? And it reflects basically what I call two views of the song state, right? And these two views, I call, these are my terms for them. These are not song terms, these are mine. So literati institutionalism versus technocratic functionalism. And basically, we find that institutionalism prefers fixed government structures where the offices are interlinking, right? So in other words, the offices have set relationships to each other. So they have prescribed functions. So how you relate to one other office is set in procedure. You can't really change it, right? And largely, these offices are to be staffed by officials who are recruited by examinations. So these are the well-known Jinsha examinations, right? On the other side, one has a preference for fluid government structures, so that and one of the most interesting things about Song is that offices were created and eliminated with enormous rapidity, right? So much more so than any other dynasty in China, right? So Song people created new government institutions, did away with them when they did not work, went to something else. So that there's this very famous book, Charles Hucker's Dictionary of Officials in China, right? Over half the terms in that are Song, right? Which gives you now people say, well, that's one of the reasons for that is the complexity of Song government, which is true, it was complex. But one of the reasons it's complex is because it's changing with great rapidity, right? Okay, so there is a preference for what I call ad hoc agencies. So if you need something done, create a new group of people to do it, right? Okay, and the goals very often are temporary. Okay, fix the Yellow River, or let's do some sort of a reorganization. Okay, and the Song government, or at least in this view, the way to do that was to create what we would call a committee. Okay? And when the work is done, then you don't need the committee anymore. Now, these people, or in this perspective, you staff these offices with experts, with people who know something about the goal that you want to accomplish, right? So in this perspective, whether you have a Jinsha degree or not doesn't really make any difference. Okay, it's what you know about the problem at hand. Okay, so and that, in a nutshell, is largely exploring this this structure is basically what this second book of mine is about. And so that you can look at what I call the deeper structure of Song government. If you divide it in this way, you find that many of these Chinese polarities, which are not at all Western. So, for example, these are the division between court and palace, civil and military. I mean, these are Chinese distinctions, not mine. I put in male and female. Okay, this, of course, is not a Chinese idea. That this is a major issue in governance, right? But one of the points I make is that women, especially within the monarchy, are a powerful and important force in Song governance, right? And that if you totally eliminate them, you're missing an important feature of Song political culture. An idea in the first book is that we can call this narrative then something like a grand allegory. Right? An allegory is, and this of course is a Western term, right? But one of the ideas of an allegory is that it involves some kind of a struggle, right? Okay. So, well, let's not get into that, right? So anyway, but one can that this is an allegory usually has a moral component to it, right? And this division of Song Dynasty history has a moral component to it, right? So basically, these guys, or this side and this side, are both in real time and also historically opposed to each other, right? And this is the sort of what I call major narrative that you find coming back to this slide in the Song history and in many other works. Okay. Okay. So moving to the topic at hand. So what does money and cash have to do with all of this? The major idea in the talk today is that the Southern Song monarchy essentially set up a system of paper currency and almost in a certain sense a bank whose effect, if not its purpose, was to use paper to filter bronze coins out of the market for domestic reasons and also for overseas use. So here one finds a quote from, wait a second. Sorry, I missed a slide. This is, excuse me. So in this quotation, right, which this quotation comes from almost exactly the time that the weights are being issued, right? And the major point of this quotation, this is basically where the title of the talk comes from, right? Okay, and the point being made here is that when officials deal with people, right, the official gives you paper, okay, currency, okay, but he gets coin back, okay? A more elaborate expression of the same idea comes about 20 years later from Yeshua, right? And very interesting here. He says, what we call paper today is now governed by paper currency. And so as paper circulates, our coins become fewer and fewer. This is today a problem for which there is no solution. For indeed, to print as much paper as one wishes may rashly patch over the deficits of one generation, but hand down misery to the future. And very interesting. This is a quotation which, you know, is still very, very appropriate, okay, for many societies. But one of the interesting things here is that notice the definition of Chen is changing, right? So he makes a difference between what he calls 所谓钱, which is paper, right? Whereas for him, the real Chen, okay, is a coin, okay? So that even in this quotation, you can see that the definition of Qian, okay, is changing, right? Okay, now before we get to the razor, I think many of you will know most of this, but for those of you who are new to Song history, this is a map of Northern Song, and what you see is that it was necessary for the Song to maintain a defensive position along the entire northern border, right? So, and this was a perennial, meaning constant problem in Song, right? There were basically three approaches to military organization, military funding in Song, right? First, 80% of the state budget went to supporting this military institution. And there were basically three options. First, military governors, right? This is the system that one has at the end of Tang, continues through 5 dynasties and into early Song. These are professional soldiers, but they are stationed in permanent areas. Their commanders have long-term appointments. Very often, the commander's son will basically take over the position, right? They have direct control over local revenues. They collect the taxes, right? And they appoint their juniors, right? Now, the advantage of this for the court is that it's cheaper, okay? And it's fairly easy to effect sort of coordination, right? Because one person in one organization controls a fairly large amount of territory. The disadvantage is you can't trust these guys, right? Okay. They can often be very harsh on the population, and the court has very little oversight over these people. Okay. So one of the first things that the two early Song emperors do is they basically do what they can to get control over this situation, right? And what they go to is number two, which is a professional army. They're stationed on the borders, so all across the north, but the commanders rotate, they change, right? And so that there does not develop any close relationship between the commander and his soldiers, right? The advantage is that the court has total control, right? Because they change the commanders, right? The disadvantage is that it's the most expensive option, and supply and coordination between all of these armies is very difficult, okay? And very often there's a decline in readiness because you get one commander after another, and he knows he's going to be gone in a couple of years, so he's not terribly concerned with how well his soldiers fight, okay? Third option is local militias, and this is always the preferred Confucian option, right? This is a Confucian ideal, comes from the Tang Fubin. The Baojia of Wang Lanshi is a version. Advantages here, it's cheaper, right? Local plans are in control. The disadvantage is coordination with the court is difficult. Quality of soldiers is not very good, and it can very easily turn into basically warlordism, okay? But so these are the three options you have in Song. The next series of slides attempts to show the relationship between inflation and warfare in Song. So inflation statistics on Song are difficult. It's very unreliable, right? But this is pretty much the best we have, right? And it functions here. The thing you notice here is this is an incredibly gigantic spike, okay, in the northern-southern transition, right? If we take out Southern Song, we have this, right? If now we take out that big spike right at the very end and just look over Northern Song, right? What we find is that the inflation correlates, okay, very closely with major Song military operations, whether these are defensive or whether they are offensive. So whether the Song is defending or attacking, right, you get pretty much the same effect, right? There is the point of this is that there is no coordination, okay, between which system you have in operation at the time. So 1, 2, and 3 are when those three options for military organizations I just went through are basically working in Song, right? And the point of this slide is to show that it doesn't really make any difference which way you go. War costs money, okay? And this is reflected in obviously in the price of rice, right? Southern Song is pretty much the same, okay? And in Southern Song, notice that you go from this incredible spike during the warfare of the transition to a point that is pretty much the lowest in Southern Song. And this is Qingque, right? So almost nobody likes him, okay? But he did his job, okay? In the sense that he restored Song to economic stability, right? Okay, and that is reflected here in this chart. Right? This I'll talk about in more detail. This is rather complex. This I'll talk about in more detail at the Chinese University on Thursday. But this chart correlates the entries in the Songhua in the two sections, one military, the other economic. And it's based on the assumption that an entry in the Songhua indicates something that happened, something somebody did. Okay? What that may be varies enormously, but if you correlate activity across those two areas in the Songhua, what you find is that where there are spikes, and this is just a cutout of what's up there. This is a cutout of what's up there, right? So if you have the two lines basically pretty much together, right, it means that the court basically has managed to finance whatever is going on militarily, right? If you have a big, huge purple spike, right, like you have here and here, right, then this is a problem, okay? Here, notice, things are very well coordinated, right? This is the reign of Zheng Zong, right, who also in high school Chinese history, okay, has a very bad reputation, okay? Not one of the best Song emperors, but notice he held it together for quite a while, okay? This is, these are the Tangut Wars, okay, here. And these are the problems that make major troubles, okay? Because this basically has great difficulty getting resolved. And this is Qing Kuei, right? So you see here just a massive demilitarization, okay, here versus the economic activity, right? Okay. So as I say, we'll talk more about this on Thursday. Now, the major thing that Qing Kuei did was to reorganize the so-called house armies into what the so-called foreign camp armies, and to put them in control, or to finance them through the zoning law, right? Now, this is a standard part of Southern Song history. However, what is not so well known is that these zoning law are central to understanding paper money and currency. Here is a slide that shows where the government's money was spent. Okay, so this is revenue allocation in 1190. It's one of the few years for which we have pretty good information. And what one finds is that far and away, the zoning law take up the take up a sizable chunk of the money, right? This chart is organized so that money that goes to non-military operations is over here, right? And it's basically only two. So funding the monarchy's bank and payment for civil officials, right, is that much. All the other money, either to the zoning law, right, or money that was retained locally. So that, in other words, you collect the taxes, part of it went up to the court, but a large portion was retained locally. And most of that money was spent on funding local military. So it's going for soldiers in one way or another. So anyway, what's interesting here is that if you take this one year, you find that the 80% rule is almost exactly reflected, okay, in these statistics. Now, also at issue in paper money, this is all background, okay, sorry, we'll get there momentarily. Also at issue is the issue of military commerce. In other words, soldiers or generals basically going into business, right? Taizu permitted generals to engage in commerce, tax-free, And he did this in order to reduce the costs of his own cost. They grow over northern Song. Certain people don't think this is a good idea, okay? Other people think it's a great idea. So there's no unanimity about this in Song. But it is one factor in the enormous expansion of the so-called house armies or the family armies of the 1930s. So UFA, okay? I think UFA is reputed to have had 20 million strings in profits from his own operations, right? This, the histories don't say so, but that may be one of the major reasons that Baozong and Qinghui decided to move against them, right? When they did, they only found 1 million sort of on hand. So again, we're not too terribly clear what happened there, okay? But it gives you an idea of the scale of these kind of operations. Another general of the time, so 80,000 of his 50,000 troops were directly engaged in these operations, right? And whoops, that's not the slide I'm looking for. Yeah, these operations included construction, hiring labor. So in other words, basically renting out your soldiers, right? Brewing, okay? Retail merchandising, so selling stuff, banking in the sense that the general is providing financial services to his soldiers, of course, at a cost to them, and also overseas trade. There's a famous story about the general Zhang Jun. There's an officer in his command who he doesn't think very much of, right? But this guy comes to him and says, look, if you loan me 50,000 strings, I can bring you back like 500, right? And so Zhang Jun figures it's worth a shot, right? And indeed, the guy organizes an overseas trading mission, okay? Comes back and indeed puts that much on the table, okay? So that's an example of flexibility, okay? Okay, now a little bit about the prehistory of Huiji. This is a collection of sort of miscellaneous facts which are involved. Right? I think most people know that the first Song paper currency was the Sichuan xian in the northern Song. The loss of the North deprived the Song of access to copper, right? So that they could not could not mint as many coins in southern Song as they had in northern Song because they did not have access to the copper. Cost is another factor. It cost the Song 2.4 strings to make 1 string. So the Song lost money on every string of copper that it made. This next, Zhao Kai reformed the Sichuan finances right after the war, and he did so by basically selling the right to sell and merchandise tea, which up to that time had been strictly between the government and the tea producers, right? What he does is he sells the right to market tea to merchants, but they have to buy from him 4 copper coins, okay? Basically a voucher to do this, right? And we'll get this idea when we come to Huizi. So the idea is that the government sells a right to somebody, which they don't at present have, right? 4 copper coins, which are then used to back up another kind of paper currency. And of course, the military tensions after the death of Qinghui, his death destabilizes Song-Jin relations. The Jin are afraid that with him gone, the Song may get aggressive again Okay, so, and the Song are very aware of this, and so they say, oh, we need more money to be put into the military, right? Because if you see that graph, okay, military expenses under Cinque have been cut in modern terms. There is also, the troops usually get paid in bronze and silver. Okay, the history of Huizi can be divided into old Huizi and new Huizi. So the old Huizi, during this period, they came about in the following way. Initially, the government issued, let's call them bonds, to the Zhuangzuo, right, which were then sold, okay, and then used to fund capital reserves. So again, they sold them to people, okay, for copper cash. Right? One of the people who was behind this was a guy called Chen Duanli, who was the mayor of Linan at the time. So, and one of the history says that he seized the profits of the private merchants, okay, and ordered the printing of these capital notes, okay, that were authorized for use not only inside Linan, but outside also. One set up a thing called a capital note office. It had branches in the Zhuangzuo. So this currency is theoretically redeemable, right? So you can take it to one of these offices and basically get copper back, right? It is likely that this was not an option for regular soldiers, right? What happened is that the officers and people in charge would collect the paper that was issued to the soldiers. They had the ability to get it to the exchange office, okay, where they got full value for it. Yet they bought it from the soldiers at a discounted rate. Right? Then comes the Jin invasion, okay? And during the war, the Zhuangzuo overissue Huizi drastically, right? Because they need a way to pay the troops. Right? So they try to sell monk certificates. They try to sell gaoshan our positions, basically. Right? Very interestingly, they also sold 800 professor positions. They had trouble selling them all. Okay. So the point here is that the efforts to make up for the decrease in value of the Huizi doesn't really work. Yeah, maybe I should use this.
This is for the Zoom. This is, I guess it is.
Oh, okay. So this slide, this slide basically makes the point that once this war is over, right, there are efforts to correct this problem of the fact that too many of these Huizi were issued, right, and eventually the emperor agrees to buy back Huizi, right, using his own money. Right? So in other words, money from the Neizangku. And to do this, he has to use his own sort of bronze and silver. And so summarizing, 28 million of these weights were printed between 1161 and 1166. So 15.6 million were issued and redeemed. 2.6 were uncirculated, so they never used them. Right? 4.6 million were redeemed by the emperor's order. If you do the math, okay, that leaves 5 million out there, okay, unredeemed. And this is the problem. The basic problem is who's going to pay to redeem, okay, the outstanding pricing. So the problem is that this use of the emperor's silver to redeem the old Huizi, okay, removed Huizi from circulation, but it also caused the value of the silver to fall because more silver is being put into the market, right? Which usually would not be going there. Now, the generals, therefore, must use specie, meaning silver and bronze, to pay the troops, because the Huizi which was being used to pay them up to this point is being withdrawn. So the soldiers have to get paid now once again using bronze and silver. But the silver is decreasing in value. Okay, so the generals are forced to basically use their own money, right, to pay the soldiers. Right? So therefore their solution, let's have a new Huizi issue. Okay? And that led to the issue of new Huizi. The generals, of course, liked paying the troops with Huizi. Okay, right? And they basically cheated on the ratios, right? Because this gets very complicated, right? But it's basically they made money, okay, on the troops by themselves taking the Huizi, okay, for redemption, right? Okay. So this brought about then tension, okay, between let's call them Confucian literati officials in the capital and the generals and their supporters within the court. So summarizing the difference here, the old Huizi were theoretically redeemable at designated locations. They had reign period dates on them. So, and they were valid forever, which is why everybody was concerned that these 5 million redeemable notes are still out there. Because basically nobody wants to eat the 5 million, okay? The general doesn't, the emperor doesn't, okay? The officials don't know what to do, okay? In a nutshell, this is the situation. Right? The new Huizi are designed to be non-redeemable, right? So you cannot, so that solves that problem, okay? But they are to be sort of good everywhere. So you can use them basically for paying your taxes, you can use them for buying goods, right? And the hope here is that by spreading around their utility, right, you'll make them basically more valuable if you can use them in more places, right? And so they have numbered issues. So each Huizi series is issued, and it's only good for, let's say, 3 years, right? So at the end of 3 years, all of this so-called money is not good anymore. Right? So it's not going to be out there forever. Okay? And there will be a fixed quota on the series. So we will decide every time we issue a new series basically how many we're going to issue. And that way we will control the situation, right? Lastly, there is the 50-50 rule for official use. The government here basically said that the government officials are required to accept Huizi and bronze coins 50-50. So if you owe hundreds, whatever, to the government for taxes or for whatever, right? You pay half in Huizi and half in bronze coins, right? So the idea here is to force government officials to accept the Huizi for legitimate use, right? And also to make the point that the Huizi and the bronze coins are equal in value, right? Because we're doing 50-50, right? Now, coming to the politics of this, and trying to place this story of the Huizi within the larger politics of this period, there is quite a bit of controversy about the nature of the Shaozong reign among Song historians. Right? So you have, for example, Wang De. Wang De is quite positive on Shaozong. Right? On the other hand, Liu Yin, quite negative. Wang Zhengyu, even more negative. Okay. So there's a real difference. Now, one point I would say is that that difference of opinion depends on sort of which perspective you are looking at what transpired, right? So which of these two views that I sort of outlined here, through which prism, through which sort of which telescope would you like to look at? And the history of the Huizi shows basically these two perspectives sort of interacting, right? The switch over to the use of a new Huizi coincides with the arrival in power of a major coalition of Confucian literati, and central figures are Jiang Fu and Chen Zongjing. These are both major literati from Fujian. They are both associates of Juxi, right? And they are in power as chief counselors from late 1166 through 1170. Right? So this corresponds exactly to the period of that we're talking about. And instrumental here is in 1166, the creation of the Guoyongsi, right? This was an organization which gave the authority for financial oversight to the chief counselors, right? Which they never really had in Song, right? So that, in other words, this agency basically gave them the authority to review the entire Song budget and to basically be involved in its creation and its how money was going to be spent. And this agency only lasted for a very short time. Once these guys were gone, then it's gone too. Okay, but the point we are making is that the switch from the new to the from the old to the new Huizi occurs that exactly when this agency is in operation. And so that in this chart here, one sees that there is an alternation between two forces in the Council of State. Right? So the guys in the red are major backers of the Huizi, right? And they are people that I call technocrats, right? And we'll talk about them in a moment. Whereas the guys in green, okay, are your sort of typical Confucian literati. Now, this text this here, which one of the major reasons is, or one of the major questions is, if the literati were so opposed to Weiza, right? Why did they agree to issue new Weiza? Because they did, right? This text goes quite a ways towards telling us basically how this happened. And I got the same text here on the next slide with a translation. And the emperor said, basically to his counselors, I had some concerns yesterday that after 2 or 3 years, the Weiza will pile up and not circulate quickly. Do you have any way to fix this? Wang Yan said, if the Weiza are issued widely, they will circulate widely. Jiang Fu replied, we have just now redeemed Weiza with bronze and silver, referring to the sort of buyback, right? If the quantity of Weiza becomes a little too much, then we can put out bronze and silver to redeem them. This is called to circulate and adjust. Chen Zongqing said, as long as the authority, the mechanism to buy and sell, to suppress or increase the quantity resides with the sovereign, okay, then there will be no problem, right? And the emperor said, right, okay. So the issue here, of course, is who has the authority to decide, okay, and to regulate the Weiza, right? Especially to issue, right? How many are going to be issued? Notice Wang Yan here is basically in favor of issuing them widely, okay? Whereas the others say, no, that we should be more careful, right? And the power, the authority should reside with the emperor, right? The implication here is that the emperor will decide this in consultation with his chief counselors, because at this point, they have the Goyim fruit, right? So they have legally or statutorily, okay, the authority to be involved in financial issues, okay? So that the implication here is that the emperor, in consultation with them, will basically regulate this. So this shows literati compromising, okay? It shows them making a compromise here with the strong military establishment and with the monarchy.
应该刚
刚刚才看，刚刚才看。
刚看到一个提醒，应该是刚
可以，要放了。
So technocratic problem. No, technocrats are solving. So the point I'm trying to make here is that this passage occurs only in a what's called a 禁锢here. a submission of precedents, which was done in the 13th century by an official called Wu Yong. And he was talking about monetary policy contemporarily in the 13th century, so not here, and he submits some of 15 precedents, right? And this is one of them, okay? So that the only record we have of this conversation is through his inclusion of this in a precedent. Right? Now, who was Chen Duanli? Chen Duanli, who was one of the major organizers and backers of the Huizi, right, was a descendant of the rulers of Wu Yue during the interregnum, right? His family was intermarried with the Song emperors from the very early Song, okay? And he became official when he was 2 years old, okay? By virtue of his father's privilege, right? When in order to make him a chief counselor, he had to have a Jinshu degree, so the emperor gave him one, right? Right? And he is listed by Hartwell quite rightly as a finance official, right? Here's a chart I was mentioning earlier. This is a chart that shows the intermarriage of the Song royal house with chief counselors and with people who are more or less described as merchants. So the emperors are in yellow, the chief counselors are in red, and the merchants are in green, right? This is a key image for understanding the Song monarchy. Right? The Song monarchs were the most, how should I say, entrepreneurial, right, of basically any Chinese dynasty. And unless you can sort of wrap your head around that, or when you wrap your head around that, then much about Song history becomes a lot more understandable. Right? Zhang Huai, who was the other sort of major architect, his biography shows many similarities. He was not necessarily an aristocrat, right? But notice he enters office at 13, again, through his father's privilege. He's conferred the Jinshu degree also. He served for 6 years in the Hu, right? And he served 2 years as chief counselor, right? So again, similarities too, and all very different career paths from the Confucian institutionalists, who almost to a person have Jinshu degrees, right? And that's outlined a lot in instructions for governance, right? The guy on the other side, Wang Yan, is the 6th generation of one of the founding generals of the Song. For 2 years, he was the mayor of Lin'an, which in the second book I maintained was a very important position, not necessarily level-wise, in other words, but in terms of what really went on a day-to-day basis. The mayor of Lin'an had a lot of authority, right? And the initial issuance of Huizi is intimately connected to Lin'an and the connections between Lin'an merchants and quote unquote aristocratic characters like this. Okay? So if we look at this particular passage, we can basically draw a distinction between the sort of what I call the literati side versus the sort of technocratic side. This slide is a very interesting slide. This is a map of Yan'an, right? And I'm sorry I can't get it bigger, but basically the shaded areas. The shaded areas are here, 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 here. These are military, these are concentrations of soldiers, right? These are camps where soldiers are permanently stationed. Notice that the Neizangku is here. The major inner court is here. Qingkui's house is here. The Neizangku is here, right in the middle of one of the major concentrations of military force. Where is the Zuozangku, right? The so-called public treasury? It's up here, right in the middle of the city. No soldiers around. Why? It's because there's no money there. Okay, lastly, talkers all over the floor. Lastly, this chart derives from the research of Lei Jiasheng, who was a Taiwan, and it attempts to chart the circulation of money and goods through the various agencies and institutions of Song. And there are two basic circulation patterns. So there is a larger one, which goes sort of this way, right? And then a smaller one, which goes this way, right? And very simply put, the people down here produce the goods, which is then taxed up here and divided into two streams. One to the Zoling's here, so this way, and then another upwards towards the court, right? Where depending on the nature of the tax paid, it goes into either the Neizangku, Fangzhuangku, or the Zuozangku, right? From out of this one, this is used to pay official salaries, okay? And they are buying things from the people, right? And so the circulation sort of goes all around, right? Okay. This is Bao Ming's chart of inflation across southern Song. And you can see it's pretty smooth, right? So there's not, and it more or less tallies with the earlier chart we saw, right? Where accepting the Cauchy War, the inflation is relatively under control. Okay, then we come to this, right? And this is the result of 1234. Right? 1234 is the disastrous invasion of the north after the fall of Jin. So this attempt to recover the free capitals, right? Which is an absolute disaster for the Song, right? And it results in just a drastic inflation, which is reflected here in Bao Ming's chart. This is the event that precipitates the just incredible inflation. Sorry, the deflation in the value of the Huizi, right? So the Huizi lose, and this chart shows you. So here, the solid line is the number of Huizi being issued, right? The dotted line is their value, right? In terms of copper coin, right? So you see that things are pretty much okay up until about 1200, okay? After that, as a result of the Cauchy War, there begin to be pressures, but the real crisis comes in the 1230s. And this is a result not only of this failed invasion of the north, but also the Sichuan, the Mongol invasions of Sichuan, right? And after this, the song basically never recovered. And especially the currency never recovered. So lastly, this central part of the circulation pattern is gone, right? So the Zhong's War basically more or less ceased to function as a result of the Mongol invasions, right? And all of the military movement as a result of the Mongol invasions, now not only of Sichuan, but of North China also. Right? So they cease to function as they were originally intended. So basically, there is now no longer a good way to finance the military. Right? And I would suggest that here we have arrows going sort of off outside the chart, right? I think another reason for the problem of the failure of the paper currency is that so much of the bronze coin was being used in export, in foreign trade. And the monarch, in a larger sense, was very centrally involved in this, right? So that especially the monarchy, its branches in Fujian, right? We know were very, very active in foreign trade. And when you trade with the Japanese, they don't take paper. No? They want bronze coins. Right? Okay, so that increasingly, as the song goes on, right, the bronze coins become rarer and rarer. Right? And as a result, the people see that there's basically no way to sort of back up weights. Okay, so if you want to know more, the two books are there. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Professor Hartman, for the fascinating talk. And the floor is now open for questions.
I'll start out. I know like almost nothing about this topic. It's very interesting to me. Did we see very commonly people providing discounts for metallic goods?
For
Metallic coins instead of coins based on paper. Especially as time goes on, you mentioned that the amount of paper currency in circulation tended to increase as metallic species tended to go to foreigners.
Yes.
Did we see a sort of under the table discount that was on there?
Absolutely, yes. And this was one of the major reasons why when the new weights that were issued, the government decided to adopt this 50-50 rule, right? Because there was, even with the old weights, for the very short time they were in operation, there was a functional difference in the value of the huizi and the bronze coins, right? So the huizi were worth less than the bronze coins, right? So, to a certain extent, we think that the military leadership was taking advantage of that difference, right? By basically collecting huizi at a reduced value from soldiers who were paid in these huizi. So if you were a soldier and you went to the army store to buy what you needed, right? If you paid huizi, you needed more than if you were paying guns. Very simple, but I don't think we have a source that says that, but sort of extrapolating that I think is what happened.
So what were used to enforce on officials to accept that 50-50 or similar values? Was there some sort of wandering enforcer, or was it just sort of, if we catch you, you'll get punished, but we're not looking?
That's the question is, what enforcement mechanism was there on officials to accept 50-50, right? And the answer is, I do not know. But there are enough, I think, anecdotes from long after the 50-50 rule that it was not adhered to.
Thank you for your talk. It's fascinating. I'm curious, how did the Confucian institutionalists, or however you want to call them, square with the continual existence of the ways? Why not just ban it outright and so against it? Right? What's other than financial imperative? Right? And if it is just because of financial imperative, what were their justification for keeping the system up that they so dislike? Like, what kind of story are they telling?
Yeah,
Makes it possible.
well, the story they are telling, right? In other words, in theory, they are against it, right? So Jushi, I believe, is pretty much against the idea of paper currency, right?
But it helps you when you're not in government.
Yes, exactly. So that, but the thing is that by the early 13th century, right, it is so entrenched that there is no going back. Right? I mean, in other words, the government is simply locked into it, and the Daoshui influence in the government is basically not strong enough to reverse the entrenched nature of the policy, right? Because as I tried to point out, there are very, very powerful forces in government that are supporting this, right? And
actually, I'm late for the lecture and I missed the first part of the channel. I'm sorry for that, but I'm always wondering whether the wider availability of the medium of exchange for trade, because of this paper money, has done a positive job in the expansion of Song dynasty's overseas trade, especially with Southeast Asia. Does that help the economy and the faster exchange of business and all these other activities as well? Remembering that Song dynasty, we have a much wider market. It's not only the land market now, it's also the maritime market.
Right. I think, again, I'm no expert in this by any means. This is stuff I left out of my books, okay? But I would think that in terms of the actual overseas trade, it had a sort of negative effect in the sense that overseas trade required bronze coins. We find bronze coins in Africa, okay? So that we know that that bronze left the country as a result of this trade, right? I think it's possible, and then this is just speculation, that once the goods got back to Song, so once the overseas goods came back to Song, the fact that one had trading in paper currency might have helped them, the sort of distribution network, to be wider than it would be without them. But that's just speculation.
Professor Hartman, we Chinese all know Song dynasty within Northern Song or Southern Song were two very, very dark dynasty, both in politics and in the internal affairs. Because of the invasion of Mongols, because of the invasion of Manchu, during the Northern Song Dynasty. Then they move into the Southern Song Dynasty. So can you, do you think that those paper currencies or coins issued during the Northern Song Dynasty or the Southern Song Dynasty were valuable, or instead people during that two dynasties were doing the barter system instead of currency? That means exchange food, exchange things for things. Do you think that were possible, or do you have any other comment?
But the use of paper currency continued under the yuan, right? So they continue to issue their own, right? Of course, in early Ming, the Ming, no more, right? So the Ming, early Ming has paper currency, but I forget exactly when they abandoned it, right? So that's
So do you think the barter system instead of currency, instead of the currency or coins available at the hands of citizens during then possible?
I do not know very much about Ming, but
I mean, the Song Dynasty, the Northern Song and the Southern Song. I mean, during that time, they were invading of the Mongols and Manchus during the Northern Song Dynasty. That's why later on they moved into Hanzhou, established the Southern Song Dynasty. So my question, I mean, forgive me if I'm naive. Were the currency or the coins actually available? I mean, circulate massively among the citizens then, or do you think in the absence of currency or coins, they're doing the barter system? That means change things for things, change the food from something else, or maybe their furniture, or maybe their dress.
from what I understand, in Song, I think under normal circumstances, bartering, as you describe it, was not necessary. I mean, money, in other words, unless it's some warfare or some sort of catastrophic situation. But under normal times, there was enough currency, right? Either bronze, right, or paper, right, for normal everyday transactions. And one of the major reasons for this, one of the major reasons that the Song government is so interested in making coins and later on in issuing paper currency is because it makes it much easier to collect taxes. Right? Because in earlier times, a peasant, when he wanted to pay his taxes, had to take his grain, okay, and give it physically over to the government, right? So that now in Song that still happened, right? But there is in Song a vast expansion, different kinds of taxation, which depend on money.
Thank you, very kindly. Thank you.
I mean, so going back to the chart about the inflation, prices, and also the Song Hui Yao entries, and of course comparing them, right? So the comparison showing whether the government held it up, right? The activities.
Yeah.
You know, as well as when I was reading a book, I also was pondering about whether the two groups of officials actually had a pretty different perception of that, you know, of that sort of whether the government was able to hold up its activities, you know, especially the military actions, and so your comments on sort of how both groups, the technocrats and the literati institutionalists, how they perceived this sort of
Yeah,
difference.
the Song government could not run a deficit, right? In other words, they had no mechanism, and there's a certain amount of, how should I say, difference of opinion over this, right? But some scholars think that there was a kind of public debt, or certain paper instruments functioned as a kind of public debt, right? Other scholars think that that's not what happened, right? But in simple terms, the Song government had no way to run a deficit, right? Which means that they had to raise money somehow, right? So that, and there is a very strong difference of opinion over how to raise extra funds, right? And the point that I make, especially in the second book, is that Confucian literati officials are rarely, some are, but rarely are they financial, in financial careers. Because I really think there is, as Hartwell argued, a career track in Song for financial experts, let's say. I don't necessarily think he's right about that this existed for all of Song, but there certainly were such officials. And as I tried to show here, at least in this one case, the Confucian officials, this is one of the rare times when they are actually involved in a major financial decision, right? Because as I said, usually the chief counselor or, is not involved, right? So in other words, the Hubu reports directly up to them, right? And most of the financial apparatus in Song government does not really go through those agencies that were typically controlled by Confucian literati, right? So that I have one chart, I think I'll talk about this on Thursday, that shows, if you look at Song government, the entirety of it, one of the points I make is that you can identify institutions that are mostly, let's say, on one side of this perspective, and those that are on the other, and those that are routinely in the middle, right? And it's because one of the main ideas here is that because there is constant tension between these two perspectives, there's always tension. So people are moving back and forth, right, to this way and that way, right? So that it's, in that sense, what I call a continuum, right? And an official may change his position from one time to another, right? But much of the tension in Song government comes out of those agencies where the two groups are forced, because of the nature of the institution, to work together. And one of the points I make in the second book is that one of the really interesting things about Xiaozong is that he did more than most Song emperors to search for creative ways to make the two sides work together, right? And he never really solved the problem, right? But for most of his reign, he went constantly back and forth from one side to the other, trying to convince them to work together. And he was never entirely successful. This business with the Huizi is one interesting example of a compromise. And I think the fact that that central passage I used does not exist in any of the standards of histories is because in the 13th century, after the Huizi just collapsed, right? And when there is serious Daoxue influence in government during Li Zong's reign, right? Passages like that become very embarrassing. Because the grandson of, this is Hanmi, right? is centrally involved in compiling one of the major histories of Song. And Chen Ching is his grandfather or whatever. So obviously he's not going to put that passage in. Right.
Math. I have a follow-up question about the source. That you mentioned, is it from Wu Yong's 晋故事?
Yes,
And why did Wu Yong mention this? What's the
because
context of the?
they were as the Huizi in the 13th century came under increasing pressure. There was increasing pressure to find some sort of a solution. Right? And as I say, it was unsuccessful, but there's quite a large literature of people who have ideas about how to restore stability to the Huizi. Right? And it's a very large literature. And Wu Yong's memorial is one of those.
I see. Thanks.
I have two questions, Prof. One is based on your comment on the Emperor Xiaozong's reign. So I also find a very short period at the beginning of the Emperor Huizong's reign. It's called Jianzhong Jingguo. And in that period, the Empress daughter Xiao tried to make what we call a balanced government with two factions, with mixed officials in the court. And could we compare it with the Emperor Xiaozong's practice? They also try to make such like cooperation or the harmonious governance of two factions. It's similar.
Yeah, the question here is at the very beginning of Song Huizong's reign, so about the year 1100, there is, for a very short period, there is, let's call it a coalition government, right? In the sense that Huizong begins with the idea that he wants to compose a government that has both old party, okay, and the reformers.
Yeah.
Right. So both adherents of Sima Guang and yeah. So he puts that government together, and it doesn't last very long.
Yeah.
I do not see that as directly related. I think it's different from what happens in Xiaozong's reign, because that is basically an attempt to force a coalition among Confucian literati, right? At least people who, in other words, among people, all of those people have Jinshi degrees, right? So, in other words, in the Huizong period, right? So they are all literati in certain sense, right? They may or may not be Confucian, right? Who's to say, right? But it's a group of people who have for a very long time been at political arguments with each other within the civil literati. What one, right? Okay? The kind of distinctions that I was trying to make in the Xiaozong reign is much more pervasive, much more comprehensive, right? And it's composed of antagonisms between Wen and Wu, right? Between Chao and Gong, okay? Between civil officials and clerks. Right? So that it's a little bit different in nature.
And another question about the professional financial sector officials, the technocrats. I'm not pretty sure that because they are not based on the examination, but based on like what I understand, it looks like a bloodline or the princely based on their father's in privilege.
Right.
And how could we ensure that they are professional rather than they just have a close relationship with the royal?
That's a very good question, right? And I think that that's one of the major, I should say, weak points of Song governance, right? Is that, and in Confucian literati are constantly complaining, okay, that these people are, after all, not really qualified. They're just people the emperor likes. Right? Okay, so that's a standard argument, right? Whether in any particular case, whether that was really true or not, is very, very hard to determine from the textual sources we have. And of course, Professor Ha has done basically more work than anybody in trying to sort out, but basically that very question, okay? What sorts of real accomplishments did all of these non-literati people have? What was common in their biographies? So, right?
So Professor, where can we buy your books?
Yes. Well, Amazon, right? But, just, no, there will be a Chinese translation of the first volume, The Making of Song Dynasty History. It's done. The translation is finished. The book will be out, I'm told, this summer, right? A translation is also underway for the second book, but when that will be finished is a good question.
Do you think it will be available during June, the book fair?
That would be nice.
Any more questions?
I noticed that in Song Zhengzhong's run, Song Zhengzhong wanted to use slaves without redemption, but all his officials objected the proposal, including Wang Shi, Liu Huijing, these reformers. But based on the story you introduced just now, in Xiaozhong's reign, under Xiaozhong's reign, his grand counselors just granted his will, and encouraged him to use his power to sway. So, what change has happened between these two different times? Thank you.
Oh. Well, that's a very difficult question. And I'm not quite sure how to answer it. The only thing I could suggest is that there was this one slide that I showed that tried to indicate some of all the factors that were behind the issuance of the Huizhi, right? And one message you can take away from that is that it's all it was all very how should I say, very local and very timely, right? So that I don't think anybody really planned to do this in this way, right? So there was no, I don't think there was anybody who in 1160 said, let's create a national paper currency, you know, right? I don't see that happen, right? It begins as a way to finance the war, right? So to pay soldiers, and initially doesn't really work very well, right? But there are pressures to continue it, and pressures to continue it, which here the literati basically are willing to accept because they think that they are going to be able to control it. As it turns out, that's not the case, right? But they cannot. And one of the major reasons is that each of the zoning swa had the authority to issue wages. So nobody was, now theoretically, they're supposed to ask and supposed to coordinate with Hubu, right? But again, reality is it's very different from what the rules say was supposed to happen. Right? And this is one of the major reasons for the over issuance of Huizhi, it's not that the emperor or the central government wanted to do this, right? So that in a certain sense, the Song government was a lot more fragmented than most histories lead us to believe, right? So that these Zoningswar, I mean, that's why this slide that I showed of the three military options in Song, to a certain extent, they all remain in some degrees active and viable throughout the entire period. So, for example, there are elements in the Zoningswar that go back to this military government system, namely that they take local taxes to fund local military, right? And that they have the authority to basically do that within a set jurisdiction.
Any more questions?
My question is related to Ming Jian's question. You used the President Wu Yong's 进故事 to describe the to show the conversation between Xiaozong and his prime ministers. Yeah, and to some extent we can say this is a kind of historiography, right? Those literati during the lesson may use this story to describe what happened during Xiaozong's time. Yeah, so my question is, how do you think those Confucian scholars, how do you think their role in the Hui's for those kind of Confucian scholars? Is significant?
What do you mean their role?
I mean, maybe they don't have the knowledge of economic issue. They really don't know how to issue the weights. And actually, those people who really know the knowledge of weights is those the technocrats you discuss a lot in your book, right? So how do you think what may really happen, or what the real role of those Confucian scholars during Xiaozong's time? Will we discuss the weights?
Yeah, I think in theory they are opposed to it, because simply put, they see it as a way for the government more easily to get money from peasants, right? And that's their basic perspective, right? I think. And so for that reason, they are, in theory, they are against it, right? But whenever they come into power, once it's in operation, they can't roll it back, right? In other words, as much as they are opposed to it, they cannot simply go back to a time without it. And I think that since large portions of the Song had been using a kind of paper currency since Northern Song times, right? The idea of basically doing away with it all, I don't think ever occurred to anybody, right? So that I think it is very possible that the Southern Song Daoxue opposition to Huizi has other reasons, right? Because they are at political loggerheads with Chen Duanli, with people like Zhang Huai. So, like many of the issues in Xiaozong's reign, right? Those who are opposed and those who are for any given policy very often lines up, not necessarily in accordance with what we would call policy positions, but rather with who is doing it and who is not doing it. I don't know if that makes sense. In other words, if So just as a crass example, right? If Zheng Di is, one of the favorites, so-called favorites of Xiaozong, right? If he is doing something, right, no matter what it is, chances are the Daosha people are going to be against it. Right? And the argument is not going to be on policy. It's going to be, he's a Shaolin. So he shouldn't be doing anything, right? So and that's why it's so difficult to get beyond this kind of rhetoric, right? Because in many cases, it's, as I point out in the first book, it's a historiographical problem. We do not have the sources to represent equally the other side of a lot of these binary issues. Right?
I think I have some remarks upon Professor Hartman's works. First, I think it's related to the perception of paper monies from the Song people. Yes, since the Northern Song dynasty, we perceive paper money to using a paper money is a matter of convenience. Particularly, it first appears in Sichuan area. The transportation is no good. So the government allowed the local merchants to introduce the jiaozi. But during the reign of Hui Zhong, of course, under the administration of the evil minister Cai Jing, and the inflation of the jiaozi, guanzi, as well as the iron coins. So the Daoshe, at that time we have no Daoshe concept. The scholars perceive, those guys, those evil ministers, just want to steal the money from the people because they want to support the expansionist war to please the emperor. But I think one of my remarks on Wu Yong's account, the background of the conversation between the emperor and the minister, actually is the best time in Southern Song. After the signing of the Treaty of Longxi, actually the Southern Song government gained because the treaty, the judges reduced the payments from Xiaoxing treaties. And during the reign of Xiaozong, particularly those periods, there's no war, no rebellions. The treasury of the government is the better off. I think Wu Yong's point is that just use Xiaozong's story to alarm the later minister. At that time, I think it's Ling Zhong's period, when they wage wars. Be careful of the use of paper money. But I think during Xiaozong's reign, it is not a problem. The currencies of the paper money of Huizi has not yet become a problem. So I think that we will work, how do we interpret Wu Yong's account is that it's just using, use the emperors, the deceased emperor's caution upon paper monies to warn the present monarchs not to do to the extent. But I think for our Chinese, we have unpleasant experience on paper money. First, during the Civil War, my father told me that during the Civil War, the paper money issued by the nationalist parties. So we're so scared. We got a note over $1 million, but you cannot buy anything at home. And when the founding of PRCs, so they're so scared, issue all kinds of restrictions and lower the currency of the paper monies. And we love to exchange food. We treasure exact food. My professor in Taiwan told me that he was a professor in Taiwan University. What kind of payment they receive? Really a cup of rice every month, oil, because we don't trust paper money anymore. It's an unpleasant experience. But I think it's interesting. when we compare who buy clients, so the quick views, he issued the 中通 paper currencies, but could it become a comparison? Because during the Mongol rule, no Confucian scholar, no Dao Xue, who did it? The non-Chinese financial experts. The two guys regard as evil ministers. But it seems that the 中通 currency, it works. Because Kublai Khan's make a clear instruction. We only use paper money. No coins was allowed to use. Because Mongol dynasty, Mongol Empire so powerful. Even in Korea, in Southeast Asia, in all those areas, the Mongol force reach, they have to use the paper money. Exactly the power of US dollar nowadays. You are not allowed to exchange back the gold or silver with the paper money because the Mongol Empire was so powerful. You have to trust the paper money. And the people are familiar with using the 中通 currencies, not until the end of Mongol dynasty. And then the Ming people, they're so scared, the phobia, so they refuse to use paper money again. And then, of course, we know that in the middle of Ming dynasty, the flow of silver taels from Mexico's, so we used to use silver. So silver become the currency in Ming and Qing dynasty. And in Qing dynasty, the government did not issue paper money. And later, a matter of convenience, the Shanxi merchants, they issue that kind of notes, but it was used by many people. Even you bribe anyone, you pay the notes, not issued by the Qing government, but issued by the private merchants, the Shanxi merchants. I think it's a matter of the perception. Do we trust a paper? You give me an American note, of course I trust it. Yeah, the more I like. But you issue a note. We use at the Ghost Festival. Yeah, Ming Tong. I witnessed words. They're funny. The Ming Tong, the health currency, is very similar to a US dollar. If you're careless, so careless, you mix it up. One of my final remark is that if you go to the Song Wang Tai NPR stations, you will find a lot of coins, copper coins, dig from the sites. That means Hong Kong, suppose, is also a minor commercial site in South China. We do not find any notes, any coins, but we found a lot of copper coins. What does it mean? The people in Hong Kong or sword merchant, they believe in the coins rather than you give me a note, particularly at the end of Southern Song Dynasty. So that is my some remark or observation. I think the common sense, we trust coins, we trust silver, or even trust a bottle rather than paper, because it results from unpleasant experience during wars and disasters. The using of the Wu Yong's account, I believe that that's a Wu Yong's during his time. He just warned the minister, be careful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I did not look at all into the original memorial to see what his point is and how he used this.
I sometimes doubt did he deliberately create that kind of account. I don't think in Xiao Zhong's reign the minister is necessary to raise that point. The Huizi currencies at that point did not have any sign of collapsing. That's not the time that currency have really the troubles. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions or comments? If not, so thank you so much.